So you're drinking a dirty chai, extra dirty. What exactly does extra dirty mean?
Extra caffeine, so shots of espresso.
Well, I know that a dirty chai
Oh, it's
has to be.
they didn't know it's dirty chai.
No, I was wondering, like, what makes it extra dirty? Did you put 2 shots of espresso in it or something?
Oh, no. I was just playing. It's really nothing that made it extra dirty. I just wanted to clean.
You're funny.
I don't know. Maybe that adds to the spice.
Ooh.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I've just got iced coffee that I didn't know was in my fridge and was delighted to find.
How'd you know it was still good? Did
I
you just
didn't.
for the best?
Kind of, yeah.
Aaron. You're wrong.
I mean, usually I don't have an issue with it. Shall we crack into it then?
Yeah, so today we are covering Selma by Ava. Oh no, I don't want to mispronounce her last name.
I think
DuVernay.
it's DuVernay. Yeah.
Okay. So we are covering that today. Have you seen one of her movies before, or any of her other movies?
I don't know.
Or that I know of? I've seen A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Surprised it also had Oprah Winfrey in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was a cute movie. I liked it. I thought it was very visually stunning. It was another one where the costumes and makeup were superb. So
Well, it looks like I haven't seen any of her other movies as of yet, so we shall see.
Selma came out a release date of December 25th, which I feel like is very interesting.
Of 2014.
For a budget of 20 million? Is that right?
Yes. That's what that says.
Which I think a lot for Hollywood standards like that.
Movie budgets makes no sense to me. Like, anytime that I hear a number, I'm like, what is that? Is that Monopoly money? I don't
I know,
understand.
right? Like after a certain amount of money, I'm like, what is that even
Right?
money?
Cannot fathom. It doesn't make any sense in my brain.
No, definitely not. And then did have an Oscar win for original song by John Legend, who is
Mm.
I think that's him who's in the movie. Pretty sure that's him. And then had an Oscar nom for Best Picture. And then runs at a little over 2 hours.
I don't see John Legend in the cast. No.
Comment. That's I knew he was a singer. I knew he was an artist.
Yes, I've seen him in there. Yep. Nope, this is staying in.
Oh gosh.
Shall we get into the ratings then?
Yeah, go ahead.
The 10 out of 10 is, I loved it. This movie had my heart racing and almost in tears. Rare that a movie does that to me. Not a dry eye in the theater. MLK's speeches were so powerful, it overwhelmed me with emotion. The story of his journey through Selma was told so well, I was not bored for 1 minute. Everyone in the movie did an outstanding performance. I really felt like I was watching MLK. If you love history about the civil rights movement, you'll love it. If you don't know that much about the civil rights movement, but want to know more without watching some boring documentary, you'll love it. This movie impacted me so much, emotionally, physically, mentally. I can't stop thinking about it. Man, could that man give a speech. I recommend it to anyone but kids under 13. While it is educational, it is graphic images and deals with very serious issues. Definitely going to buy on DVD.
Alrighty. And then the 1 out of 10 review is Selma wants you to think of it as a serious movie about a serious subject. In other words, it is supposed to be a masterful work of art. The result, however, leaves you to be desired. Although all the hype surrounding Martin Luther King, who is in fact a rather important historical figure, but his elevation to the status of a secular saint is somewhat disturbing. In short, throngs would converge on movie theaters to watch this movie almost out of a sense of moral obligation. The movie itself is a plague by mediocre acting, pretentious dialogues, and odd camera angles. In fact, seeing this movie reminded me of my experience watching Lincoln. Everyone having seen this movie felt obligated to say how deep and moving it was. but secretively, they were just glad to be over with. Alrighty, we will go ahead and get into it then.
Sweet.
So, opening scene, a man standing in front of a mirror who appears to be rehearsing a speech while putting on a tie. He then calls out for a Corey and said, "This isn't right." A woman in a gown walks out and explains that he's putting on an ascot, not a necktie. I meant to Google an ascot.
Oh, did you never watch Scooby-Doo?
Yeah, the live action?
Any of them. What Fred wears around his neck as an ascot.
I thought that was a vest.
No. What? No, around his neck. So the orange part,
Handkerchief thing.
that it is a handkerchief thing, but it goes around the neck.
Oh, okay. The more you know. Corey senses it's not his appearance that he doesn't like, but the fact that he feels guilt and the fact that they are dressed in fancy clothing in what appears to be a nice hotel room, possibly. He says, "Wait till the brothers back home see me like this. They'll have a good laugh." Corey then tells him to let them laugh and that it's not a crime to be away for a few days. They begin talking about their future, with Martin being a small town pastor and how Corey will be the one paying the mortgage on their scene change to Martin being awarded and accepting a Nobel Peace Prize. There's a scene change to young girls walking down a set of stairs with the voiceover of Martin accepted. And the girls are having a conversation about their hair, and they mention Coretta and her hairstyle. One of the girls begins saying how she knows how she styles her hair, and as she begins explaining, there is a big explosion that occurs. We're given a slow motion visual of the impact of the explosion with her body.
I will say I was not prepared for that.
Same. I was tired while watching this, and oh my god, that was shocking. Like, I did
Yeah.
not expect it. Normally, I feel like when big like events or explosions or whatever things like that occur in movies, there's like a lead up to it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whether it be with like background music or anything like that. There was,
Mhm.
I was like,
Yeah. The 10 out of 10 rating is 100% right in that this movie is extremely like graphic and full, but I know that's intentional. This is such a crucial part of our history and just showing it like it is, essentially.
exactly.
And so,
Meant to be impactful in that way.
exactly.
Scene change to a woman filling out a registration questionnaire. A man calls out for Annie Cooper. He mentions her employer and threatens to tell them that she's stirring a fuss. Annie tells him she's not and that she's just trying to register to vote. He begins interrogating her, recite the Constitution's preamble, how many country judges in Alabama, named them. Throughout the interaction, the man was rude and condescending. He then denied her paperwork. First of all, if that was a requirement in order to register to vote, none of us would be registered
Yeah.
to vote. I didn't like.
Yeah. It is true to history that happened. And it's one of these hurdles that especially people of color had to overcome in order to get the chance to vote. And most of them didn't. And so this just like really proves what you hear about the history.
Scene change to two men having an intense private conversation. It was mentioned that the act was only passed 6 months ago. One of the men is addressed as the president, who was clearly upset about something, and the other man, I'm assuming that's an advisor or his advisor,
I think so.
sort of scene change to Martin entering the Oval Office and addressing the president. The advisor, which is addressed as Mr. White.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Oh, yeah.
So, Mr. White, the guy who's the actor for Mr. White, I just see him in Friends as Phoebe's stepbrother.
He else, and I completely forgot to look it up, but he plays like a really good creepy guy.
Yeah.
And I feel like he pulls out that vibe on this too. I don't think he hasn't done it well, but
Right. Oh, and then what also just boggled my mind is that I didn't really register that I was President Lyndon B. Johnson until 3/4 of the way through the movie. And I don't know if that's just my ignorance or anything, but I'm pretty sure they didn't even say it. They just said, Mr. President.
him either at all.
Yeah.
But no, throughout this entire film, I was like, I'm an idiot. I didn't know what was going on. What are all these groups? It was definitely
Yeah. Yeah. You have to sit there and Google search while you're
yeah.
watching it, which is great because it's good to learn about
We're
history.
here to educate ourselves. But
Yeah. It causes that curiosity, if you will.
exactly.
But then I was like, okay, what's the timeline again? All right, Kennedy was assassinated. Who was the president who followed Kennedy? So I'm just doing like mental, like math gymnastics with history timelines in my head.
Oh gosh, good for you. Sometimes I just avoid it and just hope that I understand what's happening. I'm like, I hope I get.
I think you did. I think we're good. We'll see by the end, but
Oh god. The president says ending segregation was the proudest moment of his life. He then states the civil rights movement was a priority of his administration and that he wanted Martin to be the one to lead the movement. Martin tells the president he is there to discuss the denial to vote for Black citizens. He tells the president he wants a federal legislation granting Black citizens the right to vote uncovered, among other things. The president essentially dismisses his request by telling him most of the South is not yet desegregated and to instead focus on the eradication of poverty. Martin explains that the legislation cannot wait due to thousands of racially motivated murders in the South, including the young girls, and the fact that none of them are convicted. The president continues to tell him his administration will set the legislation aside. Martin meets two men downstairs and says, Selma, it is.
what I love about this scene with Martin Luther King and the president is that he really expresses the reason why the vote is important, especially when it came to the girls who were unfortunately murdered. Like, none of them were convicted because they had white jurors on their side who also had white judges and white people just surrounding this whole thing. And it all boils down to the fact that Black people weren't allowed to vote, and you can't be on a jury unless you're a registered voter. So it's just a really well designed storytelling aspect as to why voting is so important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a very agreed. Scene change to four men and a woman in a car, which is assumed on their way to Selma. Text appears on screen. King arrives in Selma, Alabama, with Abernathy Young or Orange. Is it Orange or Orange?
I think it's orange.
Orange? I'm like, I hope I.
Orange. You're right. It's
Orange.
orange.
I did.
Jane's orange. Yep.
Not bad. I don't. Orange. Female agitator Diane, which is at 12 a.m.
I'm sorry to interrupt you one more time.
Go ahead.
I loved the placement of the text on the screen because the FBI, as we see later on in the movie, the FBI was tailing King. And so the text on the screen tells you what the FBI was logging and recording about the movements of King throughout the civil rights.
It was a nice touch. Yeah. A man, which is, I believe, Mr. Bevel, approaches the vehicle and informs Martin that Selma is a place and that a lot of groundwork has already been done by the local. They then enter a building that has a serving whites only sign. Martin proceeds to what appears to be signing in or filling out some sort of papers when intercepted by a man. Or interrupted. By the man that calls
Intercepted. It's the same thing.
The man says he wants to introduce himself, but goes in to punch Martin in the face. They leave the building, and on the way out, Martin said, "This place is perfect." Scene changed to the president asking a man addressed as director about the situation with Martin and that he had heard that he was assaulted in Selma. The director says Martin is a political and moral degenerate. The president says that Martin is a nonviolent and that he wants him to continue leading the civil rights movement, but wants to know what his next move is.
And this is where the director is J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, yeah, I think I pointed that out. I don't know. I don't think he addressed him as that.
He did. He said
Oh, yeah.
Director Hoover or something like that.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
No, you're totally
Well,
fine. And it was because of the fact that he said Hoover that I realized that the text for was the FBI. Because J. Edgar Hoover started the FBI.
What?
Yeah.
He started the FBI?
Yeah, he started the FBI. That's why the FBI federal building is the J. Edgar Hoover building.
Did you know this prior, or is this
Yeah.
something like you learned?
Sorry. Didn't I tell you I was a history major for a minute?
No, I don't remember that. Oh my god.
Yeah. I initially, after I changed from trying to get a degree in marine biology, I went to history. And so I spent a year or so doing history courses, and I actually have a minor in history. And then I changed my major again because that's what people do when they go to college. But I changed it to anthropology, which fit well with history.
So essentially, the FBI hasn't even been around that long.
No, not at all.
What? Well, that's interesting.
You're welcome. I'm happy to help.
Alrighty. And then, so Director Hoover then tells him that they have the ability to shut men down permanently if he chooses. He then says if he would like another approach, they can go after the wife, given that they know there's tension in marriage. It's dirty. Scene change to Martin playing with his children, and text on screen. King returns to his Atlanta residence. See King and children present. That is at 01:24 p.m. Scene change to Loretta in the kitchen when she receives a call from a man saying inappropriate things. I blasted the volume. I could not hear what was being said on.
I think that was the point because she refers to it later in the movie. Point was that nobody else was supposed to hear what happened, what the person said to her on the other phone. And then she brings it up when her and Martin have that station.
Okay, good. Because I was literally blasting it. I did not. It was
You just hear Martin's booming voice next.
right? Oh, goodness. And then Martin approaches and asks the same thing. Loretta begins to express her concern for him going to Selma. Martin tells her he's concerned for the people because he fears the sheriff will met town. After he turns off the light, he goes to make a phone call to a woman who's already with another man, and he said that he needs to hear the voice. She says Martin and quickly adds Shirley Martin as a poster. Receive text on screen again. Communication from Atlanta resident to entertainer Mahalia Jackson at 9:07 p.m. Then change to Martin and other men gather in the home of Ms. Jackson, where she's prepared them. One of the men informed her the group same time and men gather in the home of Miss Jackson, where she's prepared them all food. One of them informed her that the CLC group, will be there for a little while. And then scene change to Martin giving a speech for a service. Quite sure I'm assuming that's a service at a church. He is speaking of their voting right. Again, text on screen, King and SCLC, my bad, incite local. So I'm not going to say what it says. So we'll comfortable.
That's fine.
Local African Americans. In Selma, approximately 700 present, and that is at 6:22 p.m. logged.
So I just looked it up. SCLC is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
I have never heard of that before. I had to Google it.
There you go. See, this movie's doing its job. It's teaching us.
Exactly. And then scene change to Martin entering a room with his group, having a discussion with two young men, which are John and James, about voter registration in their town, and essentially their lack of progress. Martin informs them on how their how their organization operates. He tells them they negotiate, demonstrate, and resist, and that a big part of that is raising white conscience. There we go. They need to draw attention by being in the press and on.
A solid tactic. Now, I don't know if it would work, but back then, it definitely worked.
Oh yeah, because now it's just like maybe it's oversaturated.
Yep.
Scene changed to Martin and the group, followed by several others in the Black community, marching to the county courthouse, while white bystanders glare and reporters take photos. Once they are all in front of the courthouse, they get on their knees and place their hands behind their head. The Sheriff Clark tells them they are deliberately causing an obstruction and that if they don't disperse, they will be arrested. Martin informs them that they are trying to gain access to the registration office. We then notice that there is an older gentleman who is having issues kneeling down. The sheriff decides to shove his way through the people and kick the older gentleman down the ground. An upset younger man, which is Jimmy, stands up to the sheriff and he's about to strike Jimmy when Annie, who's played by Oprah, whacks the sheriff across the back of his head. 2 officers aggressively force her to the ground to arrest her.
Another visceral scene in this movie.
Yeah. Scene change, and that is to Martin getting his mugshot taken. And then another scene change to a man giving a press conference about how the progressives and liberals are trying to change their ways of segregation.
Lots of scene changes in this movie also.
I know. I'm like, oh gosh, another scene change to the president watching that same press conference and seeing the previous event front page of the morning's newspaper. Another to everyone that was at the march locked up, including Martin and his group. Martin is expressing feelings of defeat and guilt to Ralphie, which is one of the SCLC group members.
Ralphie's trying to say, we got this. And Martin's just, I'm just tired. You're right. I'm just tired.
He's being a good shit. Scene change to a man approaching the group outside of a church. Cloretta shows up in a car with, oh my God, what is that? M's? Oh, man.
Miss Boynton.
The fact that the lack of period made me so confused. All right. So Cloretta shows up in a car with Miss Boynton from the organization. She says she wishes she had more time to prepare and that she doesn't do this kind of thing enough to feel entirely comfortable. We then have another scene change to inside of the church with Cloretta and a man. We get text on screen again, seeking in Selma to meet with, is it militia?
Militant.
With militant Malcolm X, which is at 3:46 p.m. log. Scene change again to Cloretta meeting.
So I'm going to be annoying real quick.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Her name's Corette.
Not Cloretta.
No.
Oh my gosh, and I have it on there, Coretta.
No, I've been going through and deleting the L. I'm trying to get you to notice. I'm trying to help keep you in place, but also that is Coretta.
I did now notice.
Oh, that's amazing.
Next while I was typing it, I'm like, I love it's Cloretta. I'm like, I'm not Coretta. Oh my gosh.
Well, now we know.
Her nickname is Clory, not Clory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chlorine.
That sounds right. Oh man, I heard that. Okay. Alrighty. So, scene change to Coretta meeting with Martin in jail. Martin is upset with the fact that she is allowing Mr. X to assist them. He mentions the inappropriate comments Mr. X has said on national TV, such as the modern-day Uncle Tom. Coretta informs Martin that he seemed like he really wanted to help them. Another scene change to the governor speaking to another man regarding Malcolm X having a meeting with Coretta without his awareness. The governor says they cannot have Black voters with the election coming up. The man tells the governor he needs dominance in Selma and that they have received intel of a night march in which Martin will not be attending.
What I love about the statement of that the governor says that they can't have Black voters with the election coming up, it shows you how much they know that he would lose if
Exactly.
Black voters got the vote.
Exactly.
And they do that today too, which is unfortunate, you know. Even though this movie was made in 2014, we definitely see the mirroring of some of these issues coming back to bite us in the ass, essentially, because of conservative politicians being asshole. So, yeah.
Exactly. And it's going to continue, especially because it's just Florida, right? School
Yeah.
districts who are removing essentially like important historical events from
Mhm.
education.
And it's not just Florida. I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
remember off the top of my head where else, but
But
yeah,
yeah,
so many places.
somewhere out there. Yeah. Really. And then we have another scene changed to a night march. They coming to a stop due to several policemen blocking their way. One of the policemen is telling them to all go back home, and immediately the lights in the area are turned off and the police begin chasing. We begin to follow Jimmy and his mother and grandfather struggling to get away and see that a policeman is following them. We cut to them running into a diner trying to blend in, with Jimmy reassuring them that they're going to be okay. Multiple policemen come barging in and start beating them with their batons. We then see the policemen shove Jimmy against the wall, and when one of them pulls out his gun, and then one of them pulls out his gun and shoots him. Police just walk out of the diner, leaving his mother screaming, "Oh, dead body," which again is
Another very visceral scene, and it's just so painful.
very disturbing. I thought the scene of the policeman just walking out was very. They knew they can get it.
It just shows some of the roots of policing today and how it continued to stay the same.
To Martin walking to meet Mr. Lee, who is Jimmy's grandfather, who is looking at Jimmy's body at the corners. Mr. Lee seems to be surprised to see Martin. They essentially mourn the loss of Jimmy in this, which again, emotional change. To Martin asking at a church podium people who murdered Jimmy Lee Jackson. He said they know a state trooper acted under the orders of George Wallace, who pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. He proceeds to say every white lawman who abuses the law and every white politician who feeds on prejudice and hatred are guilty as well. And those who preach the Bible but remain silent are guilty as well. He essentially informs them that the movement that Jimmy died for will continue and they will go back to Washington and demand to see the president, and that if he does not act. Scene changed to Martin and the SCLC group gathered in a living room discussing legislations to discuss.
I love this scene because they just are continuing to identify, like, what are the barriers to voting?
The multiple barriers.
Yeah, between poll taxes, vouchers, and so on.
And then I think one of them mentioned they put their name on the registration. Their names, I'm sorry, their addresses.
Yeah.
On the registration, so people know where exactly to find them, which wild.
Yeah.
Scene changed to the White House and the president asking Martin, "What's your next move?" Martin says they marched from Selma to Montgomery to protest and amplify. The president irritatedly tells him that this was his plan all along to provoke tragedy and make it a big story. He tells him he's tired of his demands and that he refuses to propose a new legislation unless he does.
He says, I need a little quid pro quo.
Scene changed to Mr. White telling Andrew and Bayard they have credible threats that are of concern. They ask Mr. White if this info came from the FBI, who have been bugging their homes and hotel rooms. Mr. White says the info is coming from Lowndes County, Alabama, between Selma and Montgomery. He tells them if he were them, he would keep him off the balance for a while. By him, Bayard tells Mr. White that is not going to. Scene change to Mr. White asking the president how his meeting with Merton went. The president tells him to get J. Edgar Hoover, which was the director that he was previous. Change to Coretta sitting in the living room, listening to, I'm assuming that was a voicemail with Martin sitting across, which started with, "You're a complete fraud and a liability to all African Americans. You're done."
Mhm.
Of course, it goes on. On the recording as well, you could also hear a man and a woman said. Martin says, "It wasn't me." Corey says she follows up by saying she says she's gotten used to a lot, worrying about his safety, renting this house without the thing the children should have, all because of how she says she has never gotten used to the constant closeness of death, that people say they will stop the blood running through the hearts of their children. And then Coretta asks Martin if he loves her. Martin says, "Yes, I love you, Coretta." She then asks him if he loves any of the others. I feel like that was a very long pause.
Just the pause between him answering, "Yes, I love you, Coretta," and then this one was even longer. Like, they were all very long. What gets me about the scene is I've heard of the scene basically that plays out, but what I don't know, and it could just be that my brain didn't get it. She says, I know what you sound." And I don't know if that's insinuating that she knows that it's him on the tape or if she's insinuating, "I know that you're innocent." I can't quite tell. But then when she asks him if he loves any of the others, and he says he takes a long time to say no, because if you're being accused of cheating on somebody, you can't defend yourself exactly and you can't say no. Otherwise, then it insinuates that you are. So it's a no-win situation, but then he says no, and that is what makes me think that she is, I know that's your voice on the tape.
Took it as she knows it wasn't him. It also implied that there could possibly be like an emotional affair, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, with other women.
Mhm.
Kind of how
I don't know. I think I need to go back and listen to more history.
I definitely. We'll see.
I've got a great podcast for you if you want. So one of my favorite podcasts about history is This Week from the History Channel. And they did, I think, several episodes on Martin Luther King Jr., but this is in one of those episodes, like the idea of him being recorded and potentially having an affair. But I don't remember exactly what the determination was, if you will.
Oh, gotcha. And then we've got another scene change to Martin on the phone saying they need to put the march back a day because he needs to be home. We would have text on screen again, tape delivered, residential wiretap active. That is at 12:18 a.m. log. Martin then walks into the bedrooms where Coretta and the kids are sleeping to put the lights and meanwhile, we're hearing a voiceover of his phone conversation with Andrew. Andrew says the organization looks good and that the locals are prepared. He thinks it would be a mistake to hold people back. He then reiterates the plan for the march from Selma to Montgomery. Scene change to Governor Wallace giving a press conference stating there will be no march from Selma to Montgomery, that it is not conducive to traffic or to public safety.
What? So you know that this guy is an evil son of a bitch because they've got Confederate flags behind him.
Yeah, throughout. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was just the play scenery or if that was actually what it looked like, but very good in this movie. Wanted to punch every one of them.
The scene changed to multiple people sitting in a room and Reverend Hosea telling them their lives will be in danger, but that they will be strong if they all stick together, that it is a non-violent movement. Another scene changed to James telling John in a private conversation that he shouldn't do this, that this is bull, and that it's more for the SCLC than for Selma.
Okay, so another thing about this scene specifically, this is the first time that we hear that his name is John Lewis, if I recall correctly. And this was made in 2014, but I think John Lewis died in 2021 or something of that nature. But he was a senator. He became a senator, and they showed at the end that this is the
Yeah,
John Lewis that became a senator. But so he was a senator all the way up until he died, essentially. But he spoke about his time with Martin Luther King Jr. and how it affected him and how it like charged him.
that's amazing. And then multiple scene changes in this like part of the movie to a sheriff hyping up a group of white folks, telling them this is Alabama, that they don't tell them how to live their lives. And then we shoot to another scene to the King family having dinner. And then we essentially go back and forth between the scenes. Happens a couple times.
Yeah.
Of essentially the same thing. I think this made that sound like boring. But I never like it.
You're like, we're going
This
back and forth.
just
It's hard to do an audio recap of a movie sometimes, especially when there's such full visionary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'm not bad, but. And then we change scenes to Reverend Hosea and John leading the march. There's a white man in a phone booth reporting to someone telling them that there are approximately 525 people of both young and old folks with packs. We are shown multiple shots of them all marching. Upon crossing the bridge, they are met with troopers and spectators with Confederate flags, of course. Hosea then asks John, can you swim? John says there are not many swimming pools for Black folks. When they see there are several reporters with cameras who have gathered to witness the march, a trooper then tells them this is an unlawful assembly and they have 2 minutes to disperse. Reverend Hosea asks the major if he could have a word with him. He tells them no. Then immediately the troopers put on gas masks and helmets. The troopers are commanded to advance and they charge after all of the march. The events of the march are being broadcasted all over the country for everyone to see these men and women being essentially running for their lives. We view shots of the aftermath of the many who were wounded being tended to by their own.
This is another one of those very visceral scenes that really shows you the like pain and suffering that was happening and just the pure injustice that was going on.
Martin informs the group that they are going back to the bridge. Scene changed to Martin giving a statement to the press by reiterating the events that just occurred. He calls to all men and women, regardless of race, to come to Selma to join them in their march against injustice and injustice. Scene changed to a man talking to a Judge Johnson, informing him Martin's call to action was nationally televised and that the SCLC is seeking a court order to have the state authorities from interfering in the next march.
When I saw him, I couldn't believe that this was Cuba Gooding Jr. I hadn't seen him in so long.
I know. When I saw the cap of this film, he was like at the top along with Oprah too.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, where? I don't recall him being in the movie.
I think he's only in it for 2 minutes.
Along with Oprah, she has
Yes.
minutes of screen time, and she's like the second or third person.
But she is a badass. Oh my God. What you were referring to earlier when she hits the sheriff over the head with her purse. Oh my. It was like done in almost slow motion too. So you could really like feel it and feel it reverberate over you.
Scene change to the president reading the cover of a newspaper stating thousands head south in moral crusade. Mr. White informs him the SCLC files an appeal against Wallace's orders. The president tells Mr. White to tell Wallace he doesn't want to see any more of this horseshit and to tell Martin he better not march. Another scene change to a man meeting with Martin and Andrew under the president's orders to tell them not to march. He tries to convince them that the president is on the verge of moving forward with the legislation. Another scene change to all the men and women who have traveled to join the march being greeted. Martin addresses them all and says, although the president doesn't want them to march, they must, and thank them all for joining. Another text on screen. King leads march against Wallace's orders. Clergy present, 1/3 Caucasian participant, logged at 9:35 a.m. Scene changed to blacks and whites marching together. They're once again met with troopers. This time, one of the troopers said, "Troopers, withdraw." The marchers began clapping. So Martin has a puzzled look on his face and kneels down, joins him. He then stands up and decides to walk back. Everyone follows. Scene change to an empty church, and the group is arguing about Martin's decision to abandon the march. Martin informs them they wouldn't have made it 10 miles. He says he would rather have people be upset and hate him instead of bleeding or dead.
Well, and then there's a very crucial part in this argument where they're like, the only reason why the troopers stood down is because there were white folks with us, which could be true. It could very well be true, and it probably is true. And I'm wondering if the governor or anybody else in a higher authority also had a part to play in this as well.
Exactly. And then scene change to Martin sitting on a porch at night writing a letter. He begins with, "My dearest Corey, at a time when I need you, I cannot call you." It goes on, but I did. Scene change to two white men walking out of a diner at night. One said, "He betrayed trust and did not fulfill his call." The other defends his decision by saying he may have been guided by God. They are then approached by two clearly racist white men, in which they begin that with that. Martin is informed that a white priest from Boston who traveled to join them is now dead.
All right, and then Martin then shouts that he needs a phone. We see him arguing with the president over the phone. Essentially, it's regarding the president's lack of action in moving forward with the legislation. And then we have a scene change to John getting in a car with Martin at night. Martin tells him that he wanted to speak to him privately. He informs him their efforts are not working and that they cannot continue marching and risking people's lives. John shares an emotional story and basically tells Martin how he gave him hope. We then have a scene change to Martin and the SCLC group at the courthouse, or at a courthouse. We then see Coretta walking up the stairs to join them. And then, so Martin seems to be surprised to see her, and he tells her that he's glad she's there. Scene change to inside the courtroom to the start of the hearing of the SCLC versus the state of Alabama. It begins with, oh my gosh, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Cuba Gooding Jr. That's the actor that plays Fred Gray, and I believe he's an attorney, stating that they will hear the testimonies of the victims who have been beaten for seeking the right to vote. The judge rules the right to the 5-day march from Selma to Montgomery that it's approved. So he rules that it's approved. Let's see. So then we have a scene change to the SCLC undergoing preparations for the march. We then have another scene change to the president announcing that the bill will eradicate voting restrictions. I feel like I totally simplified that, but it's a whole it's a very powerful scene. And then we have another scene change to the march from Selma to Montgomery. We're shown shots of real footage of the men and women who participated in the historical event, which was really cool to see. And then the last scene is of Martin giving a speech at the Capitol. And then we have so it's like text on screen, kind of like synopsis of, the characters and sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, it's kind of like a historical recap of each person's future from that moment on, and what kind of impact they had, or whether or not they were successful and what they strive to do.
Yeah. So Mr. Lee's, I think, was the first one. He was the first in his family to register to vote at 84. Andrew Young, elected mayor of Atlanta twice. John Lewis served 28 years as U.S. congressman for the 5th District of Georgia. And then fun fact, I had no idea that Brad Pitt was a producer. I
Brad Pitt,
randomly saw that on the credits.
Brangelina Benifer Brad Pitt.
The what? Wait, the what?
I said, are we talking about like Brangelina Brad Pitt?
Yeah, that Brad Pitt.
Oh.
The Brangelina. Although I think by the time this movie was made, all of that was long done.
Yeah,
that one. That controversial
probably.
Brad Pitt.
That controversial Brad Pitt.
And then along with Oprah too was one of the, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I think in terms of my leaning towards the 10 out of 10 or the 1 out of 10, it's definitely more towards the 10 out of 10. I think that this is a really great movie, and what I would caveat it with is that it is really heavily steeped in one historical moment that's not talked about as often as it should be, depending on where you are. So I would take it with an opportunity to do some research, learn more about it. Some of the references you may not get right off the bat, but, take the time to look it up and really dive into what has been such a historical part of our nation's history and our civil rights, and, how it reverberates to today.
I agree. Definitely leaning more towards the 10 out of 10. It was definitely probably made with the intention to be thought-provoking. Mm-hmm. And if you're not a history buff or don't know nearly as much history as you should, like me, it's definitely educational. So yeah, I agree. It definitely gives the opportunity for you to do your own research and learn about this particular historical event.
Perfect. So with that, thanks for listening to another episode of Caffeinated Flicks. If you would like to get into contact with us, feel free to reach out to us via our Instagram at Caffeinated Flicks, and we have an email address at caffeinatedflicks@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from everybody.
Yeah. So catch y'all on the flick side. I will never get over it.